Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Roxanne Petraeus. She is the founder and CEO at Ethena, which is a modern compliance training platform used by companies like Netflix, Carta, and Zendex. And recently, the company raised 30 million in Series B. And Roxanne is a very unique. She is an Army combat veteran, a mother, former McKinsey consultant, and a Rhodes Scholar. Wow, this is a lot of achievement. So Roxanne, thank you for coming to our interview today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So Roxanne, could you tell us a short story about your career path, what brought you to where you are right now, and why did you decide to start a compliance training company?
Yeah, it's probably not the most logical background to compliance in that I'm not a lawyer by background. Instead, I experienced a lot of compliance training throughout my career, more as the learner. So starting first in the Army, I joined the Army back in about 2009, had graduated from college and did essentially a joint program with the Army. And so went to go fulfill my service, got to serve in Afghanistan, Cambodia, Mongolia, doing foreign military training, and then taking a lot of training. For example, the Army teaches you how to jump out of airplanes, teaches you how to deploy to combat, really phenomenal world-class training. It also has some quite bad, or at least when I was in it, did what we called check the box training. So once a year, you'd pack into an auditorium, someone would talk at you and say things like, don't sexually harass your colleagues, act appropriately when drinking alcohol, don't get a DUI, like all of these sort of like, don't do these 20 things that you knew inevitably the next day someone was going to do. And we'd sign a PDF and that would kind of be that. And it felt really like a missed opportunity because some of the issues that were discussed in that kind of training, like sexual harassment, like for the military, suicide prevention, were really big problems, and they were problems that weren't getting better. And so it just felt like such a miss that there was this huge problem, whether it was rampant sexual harassment, discrimination, assault in the military, and then this really inadequate solution that everyone knew to be inadequate. No one thought like, oh boy, after this training, I'll bet all the soldiers are going to now follow the rules. Like everyone knew what was happening. It sort of felt like a weird wink, wink kind of situation. And when I left the military, I went to McKinsey, and I was just surprised to see that a corporate America had basically the same thing. It was online. I joke that it was less cursing, but it was essentially the same, the exact same thing I experienced in the military, maybe with some corporate, like private sector nuance. Now we had insider trading or conflicts of interest. And that time, McKinsey was having a lot of public scrutiny around conflicts of interest. And I thought it was very strange that, again, a very real issue that was in the New York Times was being addressed by training that didn't empower me as an individual consultant to navigate a tricky situation. I wasn't any better for taking training. And honestly, I was maybe a little bit worse because I just clicked next, but I was on my phone answering emails the whole time. And it felt, again, like this weird wink, wink. And so at that point, I had this idea for what if you could make training that was more engaging, kind of take some of the consumer ideas about content, port them over, use amazing technology, and design training to actually work, meaning change behavior instead of just check a box. And talked to a partner who was in the insurance practice at McKinsey. And he said that he saw parallels between my idea and how the cybersecurity market had evolved, where it used to be check the box. Now it's very good simulated phishing attacks, and you're actually reducing risk. And he ended up being one of the first angel investors in. So that was sort of how it all came together.
Oh, yeah, I know. We have some partners in cybersecurity training. Nobi is not the same company?
No, before it'd be one of the examples that this partner pointed to of a company that really understood that if you kind of got this right, you would be reducing risk instead of just providing essentially, a document in the event of an incident that says like, yes, I told Tom not to do it. Now you might actually reduce the chances of Tom doing, whatever the bad thing is.
Mm-hmm. So what are the current innovations in the field of compliance training that your company is introducing? So maybe you can share with us, because as a community of risk and compliance managers, we see on our events page many companies
Totally.
doing these trainings, and they look the same. But maybe it's nice to hear from you fresh kind of innovations.
Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right that we did not invent compliance training. It's been around since the 80s. We're the 100th company to tackle this. We are the first one to train in what we describe as moments that matter. So what we did is take what was a static once a year, I give you 60 minutes of, let's say, code of conduct or harassment prevention, whatever it is. What we said is we know adults don't learn that way. There's just like an intense body of research that shows that you can't teach adults behavior change once a year. I mean, if you think about, for example, nutrition and wellness, it's all about digestible over time, mindful moments, whatever it is. And so we divide up the compliance training into short bits that you can tie to something that's actually happening in the business or the world. So an example might be, instead of just giving you an arbitrary, here's your company's gifts and entertainment type policy, we might give that right before the holidays in whatever location, geography you live in, because that is when you are most likely to be giving or receiving gifts. And therefore it's very helpful to remember, like, oh, it's $75, or whatever it is. An example in sexual harassment prevention training might be that we can send a training, we call them nudges, micro learning, on LGBTQ inclusivity during Pride Month in the US, because it is on people's minds. And so if we can tie the training to something that's happening in the real world, we just like close that gap between training and reality and allow it to be much more impactful because it's delivered in the moment. I once heard a compliance professional talk about how she used to do ABAC training. And she said what she would do is she knew when everyone was taking a trip at her company, and she would call them up right before the trip and say, hey, you're going to Colombia. Here is how ABAC issues can tend to manifest in Colombia. She said that was very powerful because someone is about to go on the trip. So they're going to remember that, they got called the day before and said, look for these words, these signs. This is like how it happens in the place you're going, versus a very generic, don't take bribes, which like is probably not terribly helpful, because usually people, maybe a government official, isn't giving you an envelope that says, this is a bribe, please take it. It's much more subtle and gray.
Are your trainings concentrated mostly on this human resources segment, or there are some financial and for banking and insurance companies? Because there are a lot of changing regulations. There are a lot of countries and
that's
different categories of them.
Yeah, so we started in, what you might categorize as like HR, so harassment prevention, DEI, hiring and interviewing. And we've gotten a lot of requests for additional courses. So they're launching or will launch by the end of the year. Code of conduct being an example. So that includes insider trading, conflicts of interest, data privacy, data security. Because to your point, that one is incredibly important based on where you are and what regulations govern, your data privacy regime. And something very cool about the tech platform that we built to enable all of this is that we interact with your HR system, Workday being the most common, and know the geography in which you as an employee sit. And so we can send you targeted training that's based on your geography, your municipality. Sometimes these regulations go down to the city level. Chicago, for example, just rolled out harassment prevention, like a very specific component. So we automate all of that workflow, which we've heard can be a huge pain point with some legacy providers, because it's a lot of CSVs and trying to figure out and match, data from disparate sources. And so this whole set it and forget it admin functionality has been incredibly important.
So tell us, as a young mom and businesswoman, how can you combine all this and still lead the company of, I don't know, how many people are you now? Because to a young company, already Series B, it must be about 50 or so people.
Yeah, it's a good guess. Yeah, I think we're like approaching 70 now. I think the answer is like what it always is, which is I have a great support system. I have incredible senior leaders at the company. We've taken hiring incredibly seriously and just thought about bringing in really smart leaders. For example, our general counsel was a regulator herself at the CFPB, built the legal team at Plaid, and now is here. So the answer is I don't do it myself. I have an incredible support system, whether it's within the company or for personal life.
Fantastic. So, and how was your business in the COVID time? Probably because of the online environment, it grew up a little bit, right? Because a lot of people wanted to.
Yeah. So, a lot of companies especially maybe smaller ones, had been doing a lot of in-house training. So maybe their lawyer or outside counsel would come and speak to them once a year. And once COVID hit, there were a couple of tailwinds. One was regulatory. So different states rolled out in the US requirements for different types of training. Suddenly it's very difficult to do live training to track all of those nuances. The second one is asynchronous work, right? Now you have people working in different time zones. People can't all log into one live training. Tracking is really hard on Zoom, right? Like who attended, were their cameras on, all of that. So we saw a huge uptick in interest essentially in the months after COVID, when companies realized that this probably wasn't a blip and they now needed to take what was a very heavy in-person live instructor-led training world and port it into e-learning.
Fantastic. I would like to ask you a personal point of view. What is the commonly held belief or misconception as it relates to compliance training that you strongly disagree with?
Yeah, I think we strongly disagree with the idea that it's only check the box, like that there's nothing you can get out of it. That I think was the biggest perspective we came to the market with, that's just a missed opportunity, because there are, I have this story. When I started the company, I was telling a friend who was in finance, and he said, that's a really dumb idea, because who actually needs to know, for example, sexual harassment training? It's so obvious. Don't harass your colleagues. And then maybe 5 minutes later, he said, oh, I just hired my first analyst who is a woman. Can I take a Lyft with her or an Uber late at night from the airport? And I said, you just told me that you have nothing to learn from training. And then you just asked me something that involves gender dynamics at the office. And it's a complicated and important thing to think through, because if you're not going to take the Uber with her, but you are going to take it with her male peers, perhaps you're now giving mentorship opportunities to them that she doesn't have. And so I think that's the commonly held misconception that we disagree with.
All right. So can you share with us maybe what's something you or your team have recently achieved that you are really proud of? Maybe if you don't want to throw the name, just in general.
Yeah. We were very proud of our Series B, because I think it represented like a lot of strong growth and investor interest and excitement in the company. And that felt really nice to just have that like very public moment to celebrate. Yeah. Internally, we're making huge changes to a lot of the functionality that we can give admins that might not be the most like splashy, type of headline, but we just realized that there's so much manual work in this space, and compliance professionals are like drowning in CSVs and Excels and VLOOKUPs and complicated like stitching together solutions. And so we're really excited anytime we can build tooling that just like makes that whole workflow easier.
Mm-hmm. So looking broadly in your industry, what are the major trends in your space, and what should we expect from you guys in the few years?
Yeah, I think we were really early to it, but I do think micro learning is a trend that's here to stay, in particular in work from home, distributed work. Attention spans are short. So I think that that's one, just like making things kind of more digestible. I'd say in the flow of work is also really important. I think you're just seeing, not even just in compliance, but trying to take all of these like disparate systems and instead make it easy for an employee to just like come across something in their flow of work. So an example, it's a small example, but we integrate with Slack because, for example, we serve tech companies and a lot of their engineers just spend most of their time on Slack. So if we can deliver the compliance training in Slack, it's just like one fewer barrier to like getting them to come over to a system that they, don't use. Yeah, so I think that would be two for me, is like micro learnings and flow of work style training.
Mm-hmm. And you do your creative work at house, or you outsource it to some other countries?
We make almost all of our content in-house. We have a really strong creative team filled with artists. So we have people who make graphic novels, like comic books for the training, short form video. You mentioned TikTok earlier, things like that, with the idea that we serve, we've started with tech companies, and they tend to have an audience that is, it's a very high bar for content. They want it to be engaging, sometimes even funny. And so we found that making the content in-house is key to having our completion rates almost double that of what we hear as industry standard. I think we have something like a 70% voluntary completion rate, meaning employees are just doing their training without, the compliance officer having to go email everyone and say, please do your stuff.
Mhm. All right. So if we summarize it, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
Yeah. So I think it would be that Ethena makes it really easy to train the way you want to, right? So we automate all the admin functionality so that you can have these really cool things like moments that matter, like sending that ABAC training when it's relevant, like putting out DEI training in a way that's impactful. I would summarize it as like seamless admin experience that empowers training the way that most compliance professionals want to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I ask this question all of my guests because I'm running global risk community, and we're a community of almost 100,000 compliance and risk professionals. So what, from your experience, how can we contribute to this complex world of risk better from your perspective?
I think thinking about the employee's journey, I think that compliance is obviously like there's a lot of folks doing really good work there, but I think that sometimes the employee has been forgotten a little bit. Like the employee is the customer. We have an amazing advisor, Len Shen, who is the chief compliance officer at like Amex, PayPal, Visa, and he just talks a lot about thinking about like the employee as his customer and making sure the employee can understand something. Sometimes I think that maybe like lawyers or compliance professionals have designed, say, training for other compliance professionals, whereas those are usually the people who don't need the memo, right? It's the junior engineer who's is the first time that they're in the professional workplace and they don't really understand what moonlighting, is and how that can be a conflict of interest. So just like thinking a little bit more about the employee as as like the customer and being a bit customer centric, I think is a really profound idea.
Mm-hmm. All right, fantastic. Thank you, Roxanne. That's were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something and you would like to add to our audience, please go ahead.
No, I mean, this is like super fun to chat. To the extent folks are interested, we put out great content on our blog, newsletter, etc. Our website's goethena.com. And we always love chatting with compliance professionals, but this was really fun.
All right. Thank you very much, Roxanne. It was very interesting interview, specifically hearing how you implemented your thoughts from your skills and thoughts from your military and educational career, academic career, and your kind of business. And this is fantastic how a young woman can do this. All right. Thank you, and hope to catch up with you maybe in a few months to see how is your progress and
that'd be
developing
very
your company.
fun. Great. Thank you
All
for
right,
having
thank
me.
you.